My friend and I were heading back to his house around 11 p.m. The route we took involved getting on the freeway for about 30 seconds, as cars had the option to switch lanes and continue on the freeway or stay in the current lane to exit. It's a pretty common route in the area, so I was kind of on autopilot after we got off the freeway. After 10 minutes, my friend suddenly tells me to get in the other lane without signaling. Now, I comply since he sounds so urgent, but I was confused since he hates people who don't signal. He tells me to keep driving, but there's a car that's been following us since we got off the freeway, and he's trying to figure out if it's a coincidence. Next, he tells me to suddenly drop about 20 miles below the speed limit. Crap. So does the car behind us. Other cars get in the other lane and pass me, but that car keeps following. Final test is getting into a turning lane and then suddenly going straight instead. No other cars around us. At this point, the car behind us has copied every single move and realizes that we've noticed them following us. They suddenly speed up and zoom past us after following us for the last 15 minutes. We weren't able to get a good look at the people in the car and didn't recognize the car, so I can only assume they had malicious intentions. I turn onto a random street to see if they come back, but after 5 minutes, no other cars pass by. It's been about 5 years since then, but I am hyper-vigilant about checking my rearview mirror when I'm driving. I feel like a creeper when I notice I'm taking the same route as the car in front of me and try to switch lanes or let some cars get in between us. Although it hasn't happened again, I still remember that night and wonder what would have happened if my friend weren't paying attention either. I spent part of my childhood in Brazil as a kid before returning to Europe. My grandpa was a very fit man. He was born in 13, but at the time, he was stronger than many soldiers I met when I went to war. Old carpenter hands, plenty of war stories to tell. Grandpa was kind of my only friend, other than in books when I was a kid. He would take me on long walks by the beach side, telling me how he wished he was a seagull without worries. Sometimes also, as there were less violent days in Brazil, he would take me to the city park trail for hikes. Back in the day, that particular trail was used by many, but there were no wardens or anything. It was no man's land. I still had some big-ass quartz stones I got at the time, as they were common. Snakes, mostly false corals and corals, were also common, and Afro-Brazilian religious offerings. There were shitloads of them all around the trail. People call those macumba, even though macumba really is a percussion instrument used in Afro-Brazilian music and religious rituals. I'd normally find earthenware filled with corn flour, candles, booze, cheap cigars, money, or rarely animal sacrifices, like black chickens. That was the normal kind of thing that you'd see on trails or in crossroads. My family always consisted of fervent Catholics, but they always taught me to respect other people's religions, so the everyday practice, in case of finding a macumba in the street, was to silently pray something like, "I humbly ask the folk of this crossroad to grant me and my family safe passage." Well, Grandpa wasn't as fervent as a Catholic. He believed in God and that was it. He gave no shits about going to masses or anything. His prayer was his piano. Fascinated by religion, as long as I believe in God and don't mess up other people's lives, was his exact thought process. Well, the thing is, there was this time we went into this particular trail that the day was very strange. First, as we were climbing the asphalt slope to get into the wooded area, we were approached by a random priest from the local church. He tried to chat me up, but I was more interested in the sound of a nearby rattlesnake, a thing that is yet somewhat common to find around that area. We went into the trail at like 10 a.m. after discontinuing conversation with said priest. Nobody was in the trail. That was strange per se. There were plenty of hikers in the woods. Normally, and on the asphalt slopes, plenty of hardcore joggers went running up the end of the trail, which offered an amazing vista of Guanabara Bay. Well, nobody was there. I usually divided, in my childish mind, the trail into two parts, a stony area and big trees. The stony area was the first one where the trail was smaller with plenty of big rocks to climb, which my little legs had a hard time doing. Grandpa would say something like, "Come on, boy, you don't want to keep your lieutenant waiting, or I'll make you take night duty." And Ruskies are sneaky bastards. In order to make me go on harder, and I followed him. My CO. Sometimes he'd help me by the hand when the boulders were too big, but I remember that on that specific day he wasn't laughing as usual. It was like we were both under some kind of pressure, before a storm or something of the kind. The stony area was cleared, and all I could find was some garbage left by the other hikers and a candle or two. Normal stuff. Big trees, on the other hand, a more ample hiking area, was full of ceramics with offerings. When I saw the first symbol on a tree, I was more curious than afraid. It was crudely painted on the whitish bark of the tree with black paint. That kind that graffiti dudes used to spray shit around the city. I asked Grandpa what that was and he didn't answer me, telling me to keep the pace instead. There was no marching song or CO order this time. Just keep up with me, R. After what I considered 10 minutes, I saw something on the ground. It was a red denim square with red and black candles around a decapitated goat's head. I kind of freaked out. It wasn't the first time I saw dead animals. I mean, I killed my first chicken at school when I was 6, but the decapitated goat made no sense in my head. Grandpa took me firmly by the hand and guided me through. He made no comment, and even though he was calm, I saw that he was in full attendance. There, among those thick whitish trees, was a black, red, and black satin rectangle full of candles and offerings. I remember 3 black goat's heads, a Doberman puppy, and black chickens. I don't remember the rest because also there was a man wearing a red satin shirt, black pants, and black shoes. For some reason, I remember the large golden ring and chain he had on his hand more than anything, and the way his hands were, like nothing happened. That was the first corpse I saw in my life. Grandpa was attentive but unfazed, looking at the scene briefly before saying, "Let's go up the trail, soldier." While I literally freaked out but tried to look strong in front of my grandfather. We walked directly in front of the corpse and I was too afraid to look at it again. I don't remember much more after that. We reached the top of the hill where there's asphalt and a parking area for those who drove through the road up there. Nobody was there also. I remember Grandpa looked for a public phone as cell phones weren't a big thing those days. After he found one, he called the police. I don't remember what he told them, only the calm tone of his voice. We waited for some time up there for us to rest our tired legs, and then we went back through the asphalt road this time. I remember that after descending the slope, I felt much more relieved. The first thing I did was pee on some woods, I remember. Then it gets all fuzzy. Grandpa brought me home and stayed with me and my father. I have no idea what happened regarding the corpse up there. Sincerely, part of me desires to know what that was all about. The other part tells me I've seen enough corpses to look for another one again. Anyways, it was my first corpse. I can tell other stories later, but none that was that creepy. And maybe sorry for the sloppy writing, by the way. I'm tired as heck and wrote it while being a bit sleepy. Hope you enjoyed though, because I sure didn't. This is a story my mom told me from when I was only 2 years old. My family has a small acreage in the Canadian prairies. It's not too far out from the city, but far enough that it is very rare to have unexpected visitors. At the time, we had some sheep and chickens, but it wasn't a huge farm. It was just my mom, my dad, my sister, and I. My sister was 5 years older than me, so she was only 7. We also had a sweet dog named Maggie. My parents have always said that she was the best farm dog we ever had. She also never barked or got upset without a very good reason, much unlike our last pup who, even though we loved her very much, would bark at the wind. My dad was out of town in this particular night, probably visiting my grandpa in his town down south. My mom was alone with just us little guys, and Maggie was sleeping soundly on the porch. My mom woke up in the middle of the night to Maggie growling. My mom's a pretty light sleeper, so it doesn't take much to wake her up, but this was very unusual behavior for our pup. My mom thought it was probably an animal, so she took a peek outside. Sometimes coyotes or large bucks would upset Maggie, so that was the most likely explanation. However, this wasn't the case that night. Our farm is right adjacent to the highway, and there is a long unlit lane that leads into our yard. It wasn't obvious at first, but my mom saw a dark vehicle slowly creeping down the lane. The car's headlights were shut off, and we didn't have a lot of light in the yard. My mom's stomach immediately sunk, and anybody with good intentions wouldn't shut off their headlights. She also had 2 little kids in the house that she had to protect. She watched them slowly creep into the yard. I don't know how many were there, but at least a couple of guys got out of the vehicle and headed towards the shop where my dad keeps his tools, tractor, etc. At the time, there was a big power panel on the side that controlled all of the electricity to the yard lights and the house. They opened it up and started to go through it, evidently trying to figure out how to shut off the power. Who knows what their intentions were. Luckily, my family has a hunting rifle, and my mom grew up on a farm, so she knows her way around a gun. Rifle in hand, she quietly popped open the door, just enough to stick the barrel out. She fired a few warning shots in the guy's direction. They freaked out and hopped back in their vehicle, reversing all the way down the lane so that she couldn't see their license plate. I honestly have no idea what these guys' plans were. Maybe just to rob us, but the idea of people pulling into the yard with no headlights and shutting the power off is unsettling. Either way, I'm extremely grateful for our sweet Maggie and badass mom for keeping us safe. It's been 21 years since this happened, but I sure hope we don't meet those guys again. Longtime Reddit lurker, first time poster, and all that stuff. Having recently fallen down the rabbit holes of some interesting subs, including r/letsnotme, I realized I've got many tales I can share. I've taken a look at the rules, but if I do unknowingly break any of the sub or forum rules, I'm happy to edit. I'm pretty sure I've got this in the correct sub, but if not, again, I'm happy to correct. As I am a rather long-winded person when I get going, this will likely be a long one, but yeah. In order to really paint the picture for you of the scariest event I've ever experienced in my entire life, and to really feel that moment when my blood turned to ice in my veins, I've got to give you a little background on my rather unconventional and messed up childhood. I'll try to keep this part brief. I'm sure this will sound like utter BS to some, but I assure you it's not. I'm telling you the absolute truth, even if it does sound like a badly produced after-school special. My father kidnapped me from my mom when I was a baby. Not because he loved me and couldn't live without me, but because he's a sociopathic douchebag that wanted to hurt my mom as much as he could. I was missing for roughly 6 years. Face on the back of a milk carton. The whole thing. My father was an ex-military survivalist that smuggled drugs over the Mexican-American border, among other things at the time. During these most formative years of my development, I was surrounded by criminals and raised by this neglectful piece of shit. I had a lot of severe trauma very young. Let's just say that I knew what real monsters were. By the time I was located and returned to my mom just after I turned 7, I knew how to load, clean, and assemble several different types of guns. I knew to aim for the head of the men wearing blue uniforms, and I was a damn good shot with a handgun. I had been left alone for days at a time, repeatedly and often, so I was completely self-sufficient and could care for myself. I didn't go to school and had only been around other kids for very rare brief moments in time. I was a feral little beast at this point. I did not trust adults or anyone for that matter. In my experience, most people were liars and didn't show you their true face. Lucky for me, I was returned to a loving home with my mom and stepfather. With love, therapy, and protection by the two of them, I think I turned out to be a relatively normal and surprisingly mentally healthy woman, albeit with a few hiccups. Now, the point of all this preamble is to give you some context regarding the kind of person I am. I am not a victim, and I do not take shit from people, and there are very few things in the world that truly terrify me. I'm a survivor. Growing up the way I did, I studied people intensely as a defense mechanism. I am very good at reading people and their emotions. At times, even the feelings they won't admit to themselves. I've been left with an obsession for my security, and that of those I love, so I tend to be hyper-vigilant of my surroundings. There is always a weapon of some type on my person or in my belongings wherever I go, and I take note of every exit and entrance of any place that I step into. As a teenager, my stepfather taught me some tricks on how to take down somebody that was bigger and or stronger than me. He was a crazy biker and at one time a bartender and bouncer at a rowdy biker bar, so he knew his stuff. You would think I would be prepared, right? The story that I am trying to get to here was one of the few times in my adult life that somebody slipped through all my defenses and nearly got to my young daughters. Now, it's one thing to fear for your own safety, but to fear for the safety of your children, as I'm sure every parent knows, is something else entirely. It is ice cold, blood-curdling, absolutely sheer terror, and I never ever want to experience it again. I was living in San Francisco roughly 7 years ago. At the time, I managed a medical office inside a large residential drug rehab center. The residents were a mix of characters ranging from the homeless and mentally ill to straight out of San Quentin parolees. I actually enjoyed my work and never felt unsafe there, but it was exhausting. It was Friday at the end of a 50-hour work week, and I cannot wait to get home and put my feet up. The building I worked in was donated by the Catholic Church and used to be an old convent. It is a 4-story stone behemoth, and I ran up and down the 3 of these floors all day every day of the week. It had been a rough week, and I was bone deep tired as well as mentally fried. It was no quick commute home for me, however. My job was in the Fillmore/Lower Haight area, and my babysitter lived near Balboa Park while I lived in the Sunset District next to SF State. The fastest way home involved walking 2 city blocks to get to a bus, which would drop me near the closest underground station. From there, hop on a train that would take me all the way across the city, nearly to the end of the line. At least the babysitter didn't live far from the line, so I didn't need to transfer to another bus. Once I had my girls, I would have to wait for the next train to head back down the M line, and finally a 15 to 20 minute trek on foot to the back of the small city-sized complex where our apartment was. I had made it to the babysitter's house uneventfully and stood waiting for the next train, counting the minutes down until we would be at our front door. This was an above-the-ground stop, so my habit was to hold the hand of my 7-year-old and heft my 3-year-old toddler on my hip, clamber up the steps, and carry her through the train to find a seat. Although she was able to walk, she wasn't so balanced on a moving subway train, as well as being a toddler, so she tended to fall over and become easily distracted by the other people on the train. Strollers seem to be more of a pain in the ass than they are helpful when dealing with public transit, so this had become my routine. Looking back, I'm sure I looked like an easy target. It's not like I present as this badass, hardened, and grizzled person. There's really nothing intimidating about me, I don't think. I knew I had balls of steel, but unless you challenged me, nobody else would know. I was a 27-year-old exhausted single mother who was just trying to get home with my kids and belongings in tow. We were on the final leg of the journey home, and being so tired and wiped out, my defenses were down. So when I managed to get up the stairs onto the train and realized that the car was empty, except for one homeless man, I just didn't feel it was worth it to continue through the train cars to a more populated one. I observed this guy and quickly took mental note of him, as was my habit. He was at the end of the train in the last car, right next to in the opposite door I entered from. He didn't look to be something I should be afraid of. Remember, I worked with this population every day, and I knew that most of these people are nothing to be scared of. In my experience, most of these guys just had a shitty life followed by a series of bad decisions or an inability to learn from their own mistakes. In fact, when I was traveling on my own, it was a habit of mine to sit down in the empty seat next to a homeless person, if they didn't appear intoxicated or schizophrenic, that nobody else would take and strike up a conversation. If you ever want to see true joy in the eyes of another human, sit down next to a homeless person and talk to them like a quote-unquote regular person. You will make their day. But I digress. He appeared to be in his mid-40s, unkempt with shaggy dark hair and scruffy facial hair, wearing several layers of raggedy stained clothes with an oversized coat that hung past his knees. He had a tall can of beer in his hand, I noticed, but didn't seem overly attentive to my presence. Even though this man didn't set off a fear response for me, I was not in the mood to deal with an intoxicated hobo with my girls tonight. So I headed up the train, hoping that I'd make it onto the next car before we started moving. No such luck. Being the only group that got on the train at this stop, the train pulled off quickly and I had only made it near the end of this car. Balancing a tot on one hip, holding the hand of the other, and all the weight of bags and purses on the other shoulder, I just kind of dropped and wilted into the empty seats that we were next to at the front of the car. We didn't have to go far now, and I would see from my vantage point 2 people in the car ahead of me. I was in the habit of placing my girls on one seat to situate bags, and I always sat in the aisle seat as a protective measure. While we are getting settled and the train gets going, I hear this guy in the back start singing to himself. Honestly, I don't remember what, I just remember he seemed happy. I had filed this man away in my brain just as another homeless guy riding the train at night on a loop to stay warm, which they did often. Most of the time, they don't bother anyone because they don't want to get kicked off the train. I figured he had panhandled enough that night for beer and a ticket, and I did not begrudge him a little joy and warmth, as long as he stayed away from my kids. As I'm sitting there attending to my girls, kind of half aware of the hobo in the back, I slowly register that his singing is getting a little louder, more boisterous and closer. I glance over my shoulder to see he is hobbling in our direction and looking at my toddler, who is peeking at him over the back of the seat as she's sitting on her knees. I start to pay a little bit more attention to his whereabouts, but again, there's nothing that says to me he's dangerous. I have no problem enforcing boundaries with strangers in public, but I also have a lot of compassion for these guys. After all, with a couple of different turns in my own past, that easily could have been me. It was apparent that this guy had more than one tall boy that night, as he is sort of swaying and slurring his words, but he appears to be singing for my little tot because she is tickled pink, giggling and smiling the more animated his singing becomes. I study his face, but his smile doesn't seem creepy to me at all. He honestly doesn't seem like a possible Chester to me or have any ill intent. He just seemed to enjoy entertaining an adorable little girl. Maybe he had kids of his own somewhere that he missed, or maybe he was just lonely. Even so, I don't want to engage with this guy and encourage him, so I was paying a little more attention to what he was doing now out of my peripheral view. By this time, he had made it pretty close to us, and he dropped into the bench seat that was a couple of rows and on the opposite side of us, roughly 7 feet away. We were sitting in the forward-facing seats at the front of the car. Now, I was wary but still not afraid or freaked out by this guy. He starts chatting me at this point. In his slurred speech, he says, "Beautiful family you got there. You're a lucky mom to have such cute kids." I'm so not in the mood to talk to anyone right now, but as I said, I have too much compassion for people down on their luck, so I just politely say, "Thank you," without turning around. Still slurring, he launches into a tale about the family he used to have, and everything that went wrong in his life. It doesn't seem to matter to him that I'm not really engaging, but he's not coming any closer to us, so I don't stop him or interrupt. Now what happens next is my first inkling that this guy might not be what he seems. It's not so much what he says that does it, but the sudden shift in tone and personality. He's not slurring anymore. The volume of his voice has dropped a bit and the tone of his voice changes to this Hannibal Lecter smugness. He's not talking to me anymore, but my thought is peeking at him over my shoulder. "Hello, little girl," he said. Now this guy had my full attention. Every cell in my body is saying pay attention to this "Hello, Clarice" weirdo. I look over my shoulder to look directly at him and really assess his demeanor. His joviality seemed to be gone, and I don't see a happy hobo anymore but a leering grin on his face that doesn't reach his dead-looking brown eyes. He is looking at my littlest tot, but then shifts his eye to look at my 7-year-old, who is also staring at him, although looking less entertained than her sister. This is the moment my blood runs cold. In that same Hannibal tone of voice, still not slurring, he says, "Oh, aren't you the pretty one? Such pretty white skin." I'm not even going to say everything else that he said. Just insert some not safe for work type things that should be saved for consenting adults. I'm looking directly at him when he says this, and what I see in his face has me terrified. I do not like the way he's looking at my daughter like she is a piece of meat. He realizes I am looking at him and shifts his eyes to look at me now, smiles a little bit wider to show me a perfectly white intact smile that seems like it doesn't make sense with the rest of his getup. I also noticed that while his attire is dirty, he himself seems pretty clean, and his scruffy facial hair has a distinct line as if he shaved it that way with purpose. Now maybe I'm just paranoid due to my past. Maybe this guy had gotten free dental work, or maybe he had showered at a shelter but had nothing clean to put back on. Maybe he had gotten a free shave from a barber giving back. There are plenty of plausible explanations for what I observe, but it's when I lock eyes with this guy that alarm bells go off in my head. What kind of man calls a 7-year-old that, and why did his demeanor seem to change so suddenly? Why did he seem perfectly sober? I have absolutely no doubt this man is a predator. My intuition, which I trust completely, says get the heck away from this guy now. All of this goes through my head probably in nanoseconds. I stand up to pick up my bags, adrenaline surging, heft the little one back to my hip, grab the hand of my oldest, and head for the door of the car. Because I want 2 people in the car ahead of me to hear. I wait for the doors to open before I turn back to him, and loudly and with Mama Bear authority say, "You stay away from us." I don't care if I was wrong on my assumption, and I didn't care anymore if I hurt his feelings. I lumber to the front of this car again and sit in the very front forward seats. I don't go any further because this happens to be a long train with probably 6 or 7 cars, and I don't see anybody on the next couple of cars from my vantage point. I want to stay with the other passengers. It's not unusual for the train to be this empty, this far away from downtown, and at this time of night, in between the commute rush and the Friday nightclub crowd. I'm used to disembarking alone or with very few others at my stop when I work this late. I'm starting to panic at this point about what I could do at my stop coming up. It is also on the part of the line that is still above ground, and I'm not going to have a crowd of people to get lost in. This creep could easily follow me on my walk through the complex and either attack me alone or follow me home. Because I'm pondering my predicament and literally terrified, I don't immediately register that the people who were on the car with me have gotten off the train and I am now alone again. Several minutes go by and we are getting close to our stop when I hear the whoosh of the car doors opening behind me. Please be another passenger. I'm hoping to myself before I look behind me. Nope, it's creepy Hannibal the hobo heading toward me again, but this time he is glaring at me. No more smile, no more singing, no more slurring. Just an evil glare as he plods my direction. He's got his left hand up on the overhead bar with his right hand seeming to hold something inside his jacket as he plods towards me. My stomach drops into my toes and my heart leaps into my throat. We are all alone several cars behind anyone I can see. I don't wait to find out what he's got in his jacket. I hadn't set down any bags this time. They were still over my shoulder and I was still holding my youngest. So I just grab the hand of my oldest and tell her that we need to get to the front. I can tell she is scared too now, but I'm trying to not frighten her too bad. I kind of push and pull her gently in front of me, thinking if I can get to the front of the car, even if it's empty, I'll be right behind the conductor. I'm going as fast as I can, which isn't very fast with everything that I'm juggling. As I'm nearing the doors again, I can see that the next car is empty, but the next car has people. I'm almost there as long as he doesn't catch up to us. We should be safe. We are now almost to my stop and the train is slowing down again. I hear the door swoosh open again behind me. Shit. I glance over my shoulder to see this guy is running at me. I have never been so terrified in my life. I move ahead as fast as I can into the next car, but I know I'm not going to make it to the next one filled with people, and nobody seems to be looking this way from the car ahead, and the train is pulling into the stop. This is that moment when time just seems to slow down. I'm thinking this guy plans to incapacitate me with no hands to defend myself, and he is going to run off the stopping train with one or both of my girls. Now, my adrenaline is surging and I can feel my heart thumping at warp speed. I drop the bags from my shoulder, not giving one shit about what's in them now. I need free movement. I tell my 7-year-old to stay behind me as I squat down to plop my youngest on the train floor. In one motion, I turn around, raise up, pull my pocket knife out of my back pocket, and flip it open, taking a wide-legged defensive stance. I don't know if it was the security of the knife in my hands or that one final surge of adrenaline, but I swear, as I stood up, I grew. I felt like Mario having just gotten his mushroom. I felt invincible, 3 times my size and superhuman. Nobody was going to get through me to my babies, even if I was going to get stabbed. He stops dead in his tracks when he sees the knife about 5 feet in front of me. I sway a bit with the brake on the train, bringing it to a halt, but keep my footing. Without thinking, I scream at this guy. Take one more step and I will cut off your balls and choke you with them. I see his eyes widen at this. He obviously did not expect this kind of reaction. He looks in my eyes, looks at the knife, looks behind me at my kids, and one more time glances back to my eyes. Then he turns tail and runs out the open doors and off the train. I barely register a couple of college students. By the look at them, they hop onto my car and immediately hop off. Probably because I'm still standing there looking like a psycho with a knife out. I hear the ding and swoosh of the doors closing again, and the train moves on. At this point, I just kind of crumpled to the floor and hugged my kids to me and bursted into tears. My oldest is crying too, while her little sister is just completely bewildered. I didn't move from the floor until we pulled into the next stop at the West Portal, where we disembarked and I called my roommate and best friend. He was a man with big biceps and uncanny strength for his size. I wanted him to meet me at the train stop so we didn't have to walk through the complex alone in the dark after this craziness, which, of course, he did because he's amazing like that. I never stayed on an empty train after that. No matter how tired I was, I would move to a car full of people. I never saw Hannibal Hobo again either, and I don't care to. I don't think he ever wants to meet me again either. This story is not super creepy, and at the time I wasn't that concerned about it, but years later I do find it more than weird. This happened when I was 16. One night when my parents were out, my brother had a friend stay over. Let's call him Jay. I sort of knew that guy. He was a couple of years older than me and seemed nice enough. I briefly talked to Jay when I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, and then returned to my bedroom where I just sat on the bed, watching a film on my laptop. The lights were off and I had my headphones in, and I didn't really pay attention to my surroundings. For some inexplicable reason, I looked up from the screen and noticed a shape, sitting on the floor. I don't know why this didn't freak me out. I was kind of tired and not thinking straight, so I simply switched on the light and spotted my brother's mate sitting cross-legged on the floor smiling at me. I felt a bit weird, but mainly because I was wearing very short shorts and he had the perfect view of my you-know-what. His eyes wandering all over my body, and I just stared at him and said something like, "I think you're in the wrong room." He was still smiling and said he had just popped in to say hi. Maybe I felt a tad flattered to get the attention of an older guy. He was easy on the eye, to put it bluntly, so I just shrugged this whole thing off and ended up chatting to him about nothing in particular for like 10 minutes until my brother came in, looking mad and telling his friend to get out of my room. The next morning I bumped into Jay again as I got something out of the fridge. He appeared out of nowhere and stood right behind me, smelling my hair. At that point I was still not creeped out, as he was obviously trying to flirt with me. I didn't flirt back, by the way, mainly because the guy had a girlfriend and I didn't know how to flirt anyway. However, I kept getting prank calls from then on. Somebody always called the landline asking for me, and when I said, "Hello, who's there?" there was only heavy breathing, until one night when the voice actually responded and said something very lewd. Excuse the language, but this is what the voice said. "I want to bang your brains out." Maybe the guy didn't realize, but I recognized his voice immediately and hung up. It was Jay. I was 100% sure of it. I was too embarrassed to tell my brother about it, thinking he wouldn't believe me. The prank call stopped after a couple of months and my brother finished school, moving to another city and losing touch with that Jay. I casually asked my brother about Jay recently and he told me the friendship fizzled out because Jay was acting like a perv and had been accused of assault by a 14-year-old girl from their school. I think I was too naive to recognize a predator back then, but now I do. Edit. Wow, I didn't expect to get this level of response and almost didn't post the story. Thanks for reading or listening and letting me share this unsettling experience that has lingered on my mind for years. This happened about 3 years ago when I was about 14. My parents had been separated for a long time and I used to live with my mom during the week and my dad on the weekends. My dad always made significantly less money than my mom. He lived alone in a house that was honestly too big for one person, and he struggled a lot with paying rent. Then one day one of his friends asked if he could move in. His friend John needed a place to stay and my dad needed money, so John offered to pay every week in exchange for one of the spare rooms. My dad agreed, obviously, and John moved in with us. Since I only stayed there on weekends, I didn't see John that much, but whenever I did, I always felt uncomfortable around him. He wasn't really scary or aggressive or anything. Honestly, he was usually nice, but there was just something off about him that I couldn't explain. I don't mean this in a rude way toward people with mental illnesses, but even back then, I could tell something about him wasn't right mentally. At some point, he had taken one of the drawers in our bathroom, and one day, I looked inside it and found a ton of pills. Like a worrying amount. I had no idea what they were for, and I still don't, but it freaked me out a little bit. My dad also always kind of had questionable friends, so I already didn't love the idea of living with one of them. I was probably way too paranoid and way too obsessed with horror stuff at the time, but I even remember hiding a kitchen knife under my mattress in case he ever did come into my room while my dad wasn't home. At the time, it felt more like a comical and ridiculous gesture than a real self-defense weapon, since John had never given me any real reason to be afraid of him. But for some reason, that knife reassured me. Even my dad didn't really like leaving me alone with him. Not because John had ever done anything weird to me, but my dad used to say he was a little weird. Still, he needed the money and John was his friend after all, so he stayed with us for around 2 months. The first month was normal. Nothing bad happened. John paid his part of the rent and sometimes even bought groceries for us. Eventually, I got used to him being there. But during the second month, things started to get weird. I didn't know it at the time, but John had stopped taking his medication. My dad and I have a cat and John started making disturbing comments about it. He would say weird things about how my dad acted around the cat, implying disgusting stuff that wasn't true at all. At first, it sounded bizarre more than dangerous. Like I said, he'd always been kind of odd, but over time the comments got more intense and more detached from reality. Eventually, my dad started making sure John was either out of the house or in his room whenever I came over. Then one day I got to my dad's house and noticed John wasn't there. Like usual, I asked where he was. That's when my dad told me he wasn't living with us anymore. Then he explained what happened. Apparently, John had been acting seriously unstable for the last few weeks. My dad told me about things John had been saying and doing when I wasn't there. Things he never told me, not to alarm me, and about how a few days before I visited, they got into a huge argument. During it, John silently accused my dad of sexually abusing our cat, which obviously never happened. My dad told him to get out, but instead John completely lost it. He started yelling about how my dad had apparently abused me too, how he knew what was going on, and a bunch of other insane stuff. The argument kept getting louder and more aggressive until it eventually turned physical. I'm gonna skip some details, but my dad finally managed to force him outside and called the police when he refused to leave. When the cops showed up and saw the state that he was in, they arrested him and took him away. After that, we never really heard from John again, but for weeks after it happened, I was terrified every time I went to my dad's house. I kept imagining John showing up while I was home alone, angry at my dad, completely unstable. Every weird noise in the house freaked me out, but he never came back. Eventually, life moved on and we kind of stopped thinking about it. His mom came one day to collect his stuff, and after that, he completely disappeared from our lives. Till about 3 months later. One night, my dad sent me a news article. John was on the front page, and the content made my stomach drop. Like I said before, John had stopped taking his medication, and apparently 3 months after getting kicked out of our house, he ended up going into some kind of psychotic episode. According to the article, he walked into an apartment building carrying a hammer. He smashed windows, destroyed parts of the building, and eventually set it on fire. A woman trapped inside her apartment died in the flames, and he violently attacked another person in the building with the hammer before police finally arrested him. The creepiest part was that nobody in the building ever knew him. He had absolutely no connection to any of the victims. They were complete strangers. Pretty sure he's locked up right now, but even years later, my dad and I still think about it sometimes. What would have happened if he had stayed with us? It's crazy to think we lived with a man accused of first-degree murder months before he snapped. A few years ago, I worked at a small local pet store during college. I was one of 2 women who worked there, and we didn't generally work at nights together. The store kind of specializes in saltwater fish and reptiles in particular, so it wasn't too odd to have newbie reptile or aquarium people, or people looking to just learn some more before actually getting a little companion. About a year into me working there, this one man would come in and start asking questions about the bearded dragons in particular. I humored him with the first couple times he came in and answered his questions for an hour and a half to 2 hours each time he came. But then he just kept coming in, not buying anything, not looking at other animals, refused to talk to my other coworkers standing right next to me. He was definitely a dude with a creepy vibe, but after about the 3rd time, this guy came in and questioned me about bearded dragon mating habits for an hour. We all started getting uncomfortable. He knew my schedule because we were such a small store. I would call my friends and tell them to come hang at the shop while he was there because he was just so persistent about talking to me. And only about the bearded dragons with the occasional, "Do you have a boyfriend?" or pickup line. I told him I wasn't interested each time and told him I had a boyfriend even though I didn't. At first, we were all pretty forgiving, chalking it up to social awkwardness, but it started actually getting scary when he'd come in look for me and not find me, but he'd find my car, with significant damage at the time and decorated, very obviously my car back then, and just hung out outside the shop. My boss and manager started telling me to hide out in our back employees only rat/mouse room when he'd come in. My parents were weirded out. I was getting very uncomfortable around him, and my coworkers were actively trying to curb his enthusiasm for coming in. I ended up quitting that job. Around a month later, I'm watching the news with my dad, and oh man, were we in for a surprise. This same guy had been escorted off his ex's property in a local town by police. Came back to the house the same night and murdered her. When she didn't show up for work, her coworkers called for a welfare check. Police get there. He answers the door and tells them his name is Zeus. It most definitely was not his real name. Let the police in, and they found her in the bathtub on a tarp. They also found bloody plates, silverware, and pans in her sink. He had cooked and eaten parts of her heart, liver, and brain. He's still waiting for trial in our state, and his interviews/clips of news people questioning him while the police are escorting him to court are just bonkers. He tried to claim demonic possession at one point. He had previously murdered 2 people and been released from prison before moving to our area. Trust your instincts about the people you interact with. People are just wild. Let's definitely not meet again. I'm European, and when I was 16, I attended a Catholic high school in the States. It was all new to me, of course. There were so many things I'd only seen in movies that amused me, some that weirded me out, and even some that annoyed me. I loved it, though, and I've always been a great spirit of adaptation. So within the first month I was there, I already had a great group of friends. I felt precisely like being in a movie sometimes, having lunch with the cool kids in the most popular table, lockers, emergency shooting simulations, and football games. All new and exciting to me. Another new thing for me was having to change classes every hour. In the country where I'm from, you sit for 5 hours at the same desk with the same people sitting in the same seats, while the professors alternate every hour. In fact, one of my favorite classes was English because it was the one my friends and peers attended the most. I was sitting next to this guy who, for privacy, I will call Mark, who was very nice and friendly, despite being a bit of an introvert. Everybody knew him anyway. The school was small, and among peers, he really hung out 100% despite the differences. And he was no exception despite not being the most charismatic of the school. It amazed me that whenever I talked to him, he never looked me in the eye. He would always look around or at the ground, often moving his eyes quickly. This fascinated me and of course didn't disturb me at all. I found it a way to combat shyness. No red flags, I guess. In short, a little month has gone by since my arrival and things were going very well. One morning I sat down next to Mark. He was my desk mate and we talked as usual. I asked him if he could let me copy the last part of the homework that I had not been able to do during study hall, and he accepted kindly. We continued to chat and say goodbye. The day goes on smoothly, and the next day I noticed that Mark didn't come to school. A few days go by and a rumor begins to circulate in the hallways that poor Mark on his way home had found his mother dead. But that's terrible, I thought. Such a good kid doesn't deserve such a big trauma. I mean, nobody does. 2 weeks pass. The rumors, of course, continue to circulate, and we hear the most absurd theories. The mother was with her head in the oven, or she was attacked, robbed, or strangled, in short. A great series of things that do not give peace to the poor lady who left us. I was very annoyed by this attitude where this thing was treated like any other gossip. So Mark went back to school one day and he was very sad. The gossip ceased. Although in a low voice you could still hear commentaries. But we, his friends in the senior year, squeezed into his grief without crossing the line. I'm here for anything, or I'm so sorry. My condolences. Come on, let's go out for lunch afterwards. And the usual things you say to a grieving friend. I've never been good at this stuff, so in English class, I put my arm around him and said it very simple. Yo, I heard. I'm sorry. And he for the first time looked me straight in the eye and thanked me. He was a different person. There was a darkness in his eyes that gave me goosebumps. He was sad deeply, but it wasn't just sadness, it was almost despair. I thought he was grieving. If this were to happen to me, I don't think I could ever recover, so I understood and respectfully left him to grieve. The next day, Mark is absent again. I keep thinking that's normal. I wouldn't even be able to make it to school one day. I get it, and meanwhile, completely unrelated, a man starts hanging around the cafeteria during lunchtime. I ask who he is. They tell me Miss Smith's husband. The rumors around the school, meanwhile, continue to swirl, and I get really angry because this time they are really exaggerated. You have to show respect and stop even thinking such things, I told my friends. Another week goes by and the atmosphere at school has literally turned to ice. From the speakers, the principal's voice calls all the seniors to the gym. We go there next to Mr. Smith. This time, however, I hear his voice for the first time and he tells us what we already knew. Mark killed his mother by choking her. Although the idea had already formed my mind, I felt the blood freeze in my veins. I didn't get the creep simply because of the fact that an acquaintance of mine had the courage to kill his mom. I come from a very violent county. I have acquaintances in jails and others who, although free, have done some bad things, but never something like this. But because of the dynamics of things, Mr. Smith began to tell us, since he wasn't simply a guest there. He was the town detective and was literally conducting investigations at the school, that things happened one morning. Mark asked his mom for the car keys to get to school, which she needed though, and after she refused, he jumped on her and strangled her. Then he came to school and sat next to me, gave me English homework as if that were the main problem of the day, came home and called the police. The school also provided a psychologist, but nobody consulted him. But in retrospect, I think a chat with him wouldn't have hurt. I was literally in an episode of 13 Reasons Why, 5 years before it aired. In my school and my country, dealing in fights happened quite often, so I thought I had seen enough. Obviously, I was wrong, and every now and then I still think about Mark's deeply empty eyes staring back at me. Keep in mind that I'm European. I guess for some unfortunate ones of you, this is nothing new, or you've had far worse happen to you in high school, but this all happened within a month of moving into a world totally new to me. So yes, this is the creepiest encounter of my life. This took place when I was about 14 or 15. I would stay over at my best friend's house constantly. She's an only child and her mom would let us do anything, including leaving their place by ourselves at 1 or 2 in the morning. I'm surprised we were alive because we were very trusting, like getting into a car with a group of teenage boys that we just met trusting. So one night we were hanging out at a guy's house. The plan originally was that we were going to stay the night there. His grandma ended up getting angry at him and told everybody to leave. It was like 1 a.m. and we had no other option other than to walk to her house. We decided to cut through a used car dealership. The security guy spotted us and told us we were trespassing. He asked why we were out so late and where we were going. After hearing about what happened, he said, "If a cop stops you, they won't believe that. You'll probably just get in trouble." We didn't have cell phones yet, so he asked if we could use his phone to call someone. My friend's mom is going through a rough patch financially and doesn't have phone service. My mother would have killed us if we tried to call her, so we told them we have no one. So the security dude offers to pay for us to stay in a motel for the night. This man was probably 30 to 35 years old. My friend was 14 and I was 15. Stupidly, we accepted his offer. So we both go to get into the back seat of his car, when he says, "One of you could sit up front." So my best friend promptly jumps in the back, leaving me to sit up front. We stopped by his bank and then headed to the nearest motel. The entire drive there, he was telling us that he was a war vet and got injured on tour, saying he would kill for a massage. He asked if either of us were good at massaging people. We said, no, not really. We finally get to the motel. This dude parks and tells us to stay in the car, but not before he takes his handgun, that I did not see before, out of the holster and puts it in the glove box directly in front of me and locks it. Then goes into the office to pay for the room. He ended up asking if he could come up with us and if we could give him a massage as like a thank you. We said no and booked it up the stairs. We deadbolted the door the second we got in there. We definitely did not sleep that night. We were too creeped out, and as soon as the sun came up, we got out of there and walked a good hour and a half back to my friend's place. 12 years later, I'm 26, just browsing Facebook. I see a news article about an army vet being arrested for abducting and raping 2 teenage girls. It was the same bald-headed security guy that picked up me and my friend. It was a very unsettling feeling thinking of what could have happened. I was a first-year college student, 18, female, working full-time and taking 18 units of college classes. My parents paid all my school expenses and didn't want me to work. They hoped I'd just concentrate on my studies, but I worked anyways. So I'd go to school all day, go directly to a fast food restaurant, go to work, then to my boyfriend's house for a couple hours, then home. I was young and energetic and able to keep up with my schedule. So one night about 10 p.m., the rest of the restaurant employees were already gone and I closed, working alone the last couple hours. A large, tall guy came to the window and asked what the cheapest menu item was. He ordered it. I took his money, closed the little window, made change and handed it to him with his food item, then closed the little window. It's at this time I notice on one of his hands, his left, all the fingernails are at least an inch past his fingertips and filed in his sharp, pointy claws. I thought to myself, my, that's odd, but whatever. He then asks if I could make change for a $5 bill so we could have exact change for the bus. I opened the window, took his $5 bill and turned the cash register on my left, about 18 inches away, and was making change. I hear something and look back, and this guy's head is coming through the window, followed by arms and shoulders, and he is grabbing and clawing at me. I think he is trying to reach around me to get at the cash register, but when he grabbed me, I thought he was coming in to perhaps rape me or something. Now in hindsight, I could have done a bunch of effective things to drive him back. Instead, I was screaming and started pummeling him with my fists. I had brothers. I fought him off, grabbed the paper bills out of his hand, drove him back through the window and shut it. I missed hitting him a couple of times and hit the edge of the counter with my palms and got big bruises from that. He ran off. I called the police and then called the owner of the restaurant. The police came and made a report. The owner didn't want any press and was upset that I called the police. What a jerk. So a couple of days later, I'm in an inorganic chemistry lecture, which is in a small amphitheater of maybe 150 students. The lecture is about to start and the guy sitting next to me on my right drops his calculator on the floor right in front of me. I kindly say, "Oh, I'll get it for you." I pick it off the floor and hand it back to him right in his open left hand with the long clawed fingernails. Cue my racing heartbeat. I pretend that I don't know that it's the guy who robbed and assaulted me. Coincidence? Not likely. So as soon as class ends, I race past 5 or 6 people to my left, practically flying right over them, and once I get to the main aisle, I look back at him. He raised his arms with a clawing motion toward me and growled at me and was in pursuit of me. I took off out of there. The next time I went to that class, he tried to sit as close to me again, to intimidate me, and it was working. I decided to call the police from home that afternoon and explain the situation. The guy seemed to be following me around campus and it scared me. I did not know if he followed me from school to my workplace to attack me there. They were many miles apart. The police have an undercover police officer watch me at school before chemistry so I can point out my stalker. I had to tell my professor the situation of why I had people watching over me. The plan was to sit in the grass outside my chemistry class, and when I saw the guy, give a nod and walk away into my class. He didn't show up the first stakeout day but did the second day, and they arrested him. Now the restaurant owner dropped the robbery charges as he didn't lose anything and didn't want the press. Nobody asked me and I was the one attacked. The police told me that they warned him to never look at me or talk to me ever again, and that if I saw him, they would arrest him and keep him in jail. I never saw him again, and he dropped the class. My professor gave me a B even though I never got better than a D on the tests. He had a lengthy rationalization of why I deserved it, but I know he felt very sorry for me. Fortunately, that helped because I was awful at chemistry, stalker or not. I gave 2 weeks notice to the restaurant every remaining night I worked. My parents would sit at an outdoor table and play cards until I left for home safely. I work night shifts, so I sleep during the day. I was asleep after a 16-hour shift and my husband shakes me awake. He says, "We need to talk." I'm confused and say, "Okay." So he tells me that my oldest son, we have 5 kids, was on his Nintendo Switch Lite, playing Borderlands and had his headset on. He continued to say that he was trying to tell my son about how his 2-year-old sister was trying to climb the baby gate earlier. Then he noticed my son's face turn upside down and looked disgusted, and he ripped his headset off. My husband asked what was wrong and my son said, "I was playing with this guy and he started asking me if my parents make weird sounds and if I want to know what they're doing when they make those sounds. And he asked if I knew what parts girls had and if I wanted to know what they looked like." So now I'm fully awake and livid. My husband goes to see if this guy is still on my son's friends list and the guy blocked him. I don't know if I'm allowed to give out the gamer tag, but my husband was able to find it. What we think resulted in this guy blocking our son was him hearing my husband talking to my son after he pulled the headset off. This guy was obviously attempting to find his next victim and our son. In my opinion, any man or woman who does this to a child is a creep. You would know if you've ever played a video game with a headset that you can tell the difference between a child's voice and an adult's. When we decided as parents to let him communicate with other gamers, we did educate him about these types of weirdo creeps. So, no, Karen, I won't be taking his headset. I just thought I'd share as a reminder that as parents who allow our children to game, we need to check up on them periodically. Thanks for listening. Update. My son shook me awake about an hour and a half ago to let me know this creep made a new gamer tag and re-added and joined his game. He asked my son if my husband and I were sleeping. My son said no. This man said, "Dang, I was trying to start a conversation." At this point, he's made it clear that he's targeting my son. I'm going to chat with Nintendo once they open, but if you have any other suggestions, let me know, and thank you for all of your support. I was followed today, and I honestly can say I don't think I've ever had something scare me so bad. I live on a military base in Europe. 2 days ago, I found out I was pregnant and had to go get a blood test to confirm. When I walked into the waiting room, there was a man that made eye contact with me that assumed I was waiting on another patient. I waited for about 10 minutes, and the man kept getting up to get magazines from a coffee table right in front of me. He came over like 5 times in 10 minutes. I go to get my blood test, and I'm excited. I decide to go get some celebratory tea and a breakfast sandwich at a place about 10 minutes down the road still on base. When I'm standing in line, I notice this same man walking to the establishment and look around like he's looking for someone. He spots me, makes a beeline straight to me, and stands in line behind me. I'm nervous now. I order my food and sit at a table quickly because I don't want him to follow me to my car. He gets his food and sits at a table directly in front of me and keeps trying to catch my eye and smile. After about 5 minutes, he then gets up and sits at my table. I ask him, "What are you doing?" And he looks at me and says, "How far along are you?" Women like you always smell like milk so early in pregnancy. I yell, "Get the heck away from me," and security comes and removes him. He tries telling security that I am his wife and I have memory issues. I explained what happened to security and a guard walked me to my car so I could go home without him following me. I told my husband when I got back home and we switched cars just for extra safety in case the man went looking for my vehicle. Please be safe out here. You guys, people are ridiculous. About 10 years back, my sister was walking the dog at night when she encountered a sleazy bald man with an American Pit Bull Terrier. The town we grew up in had pretty wide open spaces with plenty of room to walk without a leash. Our doggo was big, fluffy, and generally not aggressive to other dogs. If a violent dog did approach him, he would put them on their backs without being unnecessarily aggressive and then leave them alone. My sister was in her mid-teens at the time. It was after dark and it had rained just a few minutes before she decided to go outside. After about half an hour, she comes back hysterical. The dog was whimpering and had a bump and gnash on the top of his nose and had his tail between his legs. Apparently, she was just about to let her dog off the leash when this creep's pit bull came bounding and started attacking ours. First, she tried to run away and take our dog with her, and when the pit wouldn't leave him alone, she tried to push him off. Suddenly out of nowhere comes this guy, shouting and screaming that she should get your bitch hands off his property before I stomp you. She replied with, "You should get your dog back on the leash if he doesn't get along with others." He still hadn't called his pit bull back but was getting closer, all the while calling her every name in the book. From this point, my sister had started to notice how this guy started waving his umbrella in an intimidating manner. She tried to walk back, which was impossible now, with the two large dogs fighting and barking, with ours still on its leash. When he was close enough, he pulled his dog from ours. Then he proceeded to beat the heck out of our perfect fluff ball with his umbrella on his legs inside, eventually breaking the thing on our dog's nose. My sister was screaming for him to stop. When our dog was whimpering, he swiped with an open hand at my sister. She didn't run away immediately because she didn't want to leave the dog. When the guy started to attack on my sister, our dog still defended her in spite of having been beaten bloody by this jerk. She eventually got away when some friendly neighbors started to take notice and shouted to ask what was happening. A day later, she went with my parents to the cops. They said her description of him wasn't accurate enough to really do anything about it. I commend my sister for keeping a somewhat clear mind in the chaos of being attacked and for giving our dog giant amounts of love and treats after it happened. Sadly enough, a result of this was that our dog started to mistrust most men and remained suspicious of umbrellas until he died in 2018. He was a great protector and friend. It was about a half a year later when she recognized him. Apparently, he lived about 15 minutes from us, but now there was not enough proof. In the end, it didn't matter. The guy got arrested a few short weeks later for keeping an illegal wheat farm in his house close to our local middle school. I heard that his dog had attacked another dog before he was arrested, but don't know what happened to him. Poor dog. So to the guy who hit our dog and tried to slap my sister, I hope you're still in jail. I shared my Ring doorbell with my buddy, who asked me if I had ever watched the doorbell messages she had left for me. I have never thought about looking at who's rung my doorbell for some reason. I don't take that feature seriously, so I flip through the recorded videos, not expecting to see anything other than my friends as they come inside. My roommate and I sometimes do an outfit check on the doorbell, and evidence of how often I use DoorDash probably. Let me just say first, I was confused as to why he wouldn't just ask me what he needed to ask me while I was in public outside and in a more normal place to approach somebody, rather than obviously overstep a boundary and make me question whether or not I'm safe when I walk down the street with my dogs, or if I genuinely need to be looking over my shoulder. No clue who this is or what he would want, but why? I went back and looked at my Ring notification history just to see right before he rings my doorbell what came after. What came immediately before, and I mean within the minute, was me finishing my walk with one of my dogs. Once I get inside my building, which is a big house that has an unlocked front door during the day, so that's why I didn't lock it, behind me I guess, it was roughly a minute for him to come inside immediately after me. Each time I've never seen this man before, and I had no idea anyone ever followed me inside or tried to get me to come to the door for whatever reason more than once. I literally do not know anything, so for what it's worth, I kind of feel like maybe I'm being stalked. Is it weird of me to think that maybe it does have something to do with my dogs? That might sound stupid, but they are really an interesting breed. I've heard of people stealing animals sometimes. I just don't know what to think about this situation. There really isn't much I can do besides let my landlord know, and he'll just tell me to call the police, in which case I wouldn't even know what to say. To the man leaving weird-ass cryptic stuff on my Ring camera, please let's definitely not meet. So about 3 or 4 years ago, from the age of about 15, I worked in a small shop in a town about 10 miles from where I live. I guess because the town, although small, is the hippie area, I live in the rural part of the UK, and because the shop is small enough to only need one person working, I experienced a few slightly strange characters. This girl Lily was one of our regulars. She was quite sweet and non-threatening and used to come in and just lurk around for a while and talk to whoever was working. I think she may have had some slight learning or communication difficulties, though I don't want to be presumptuous. Anyways, Lily soon took a real shine to me and would come in and ask my boss for my schedule or where I was, and when I would be coming in, and would come in every time I was working just to talk to me. She didn't seem to notice I was beginning to be a bit blunt, as she was kind of putting off customers, and I was busy as the only person working. I guess because she was a girl, and although probably 5 years older than me and much smaller, I didn't find it at all creepy. Even when she started asking very personal questions like where I lived, what bus I got, and at what time. She would sometimes come in and say that she had seen me or watched me and describe what I had been doing. For example, I saw you yesterday looking at shoes in Oxford, at the top of the street. I'm fairly conspicuous looking, and it's quite a small town, so again, that wasn't that strange. Anyways, as this went on, I would often kind of ignore her and serve other customers, and she would just stand there and stare at me or look around the shop, usually staying at least half an hour, often longer. One day, we just started opening Sundays, and the shop is dead. I see her walk past outside, and she spots me and comes in. We are the only two in the shop, and she starts making me quite uncomfortable, and then she suddenly grabs her right arm and asks if I'm controlling it, and if I can see if it's shaking and out of control like an animal. She is very obviously shaking it herself. This goes on and gets more extreme, and I'm getting quite uncomfortable, so I say I have to pack orders and go to the stockroom. She follows me and waits outside the door, which again doesn't seem that strange until she starts to speak quietly. She speaks for a while before I catch what she's saying. She's asking questions to herself and in a more high-pitched, childish-sounding voice, replying, and I realize after the conversation goes in that high-pitched voice, it's supposed to be me, and I'm replying things about myself to her. And the conversation goes on between Lily and me, and she knows a lot about me. Some of the things I'd said over the past few months, and some of it was things she must have just noticed from really watching me or following. I finally freak out a bit and text my boss to call the shop so I can act like I have to lock up and run errands. I got out quite quickly and found it skin-crawlingly strange, but not really threatening. Don't work or live there anymore, but it's one of the few strange encounters I've had there. I guess because only young girls were employed and it was very quiet, it was kind of inevitable. My colleagues had equally strange, if not worse, experiences.